Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to invite our panel onto the stage for today. The first person I'd like to invite is Maroof Syed. He is the CEO of the Center for Economic Research in Pakistan. He's a technology and data leader shaping decisions systems with real-world consequences. His work sits at the intersection of innovation and accountability, reminding us that progress must serve people, not just performance metrics. Welcome, Maroof Syed. Thank you. I'd now like to welcome a real powerhouse, Fatima Asad-Said. She's the CEO of Abacus, a leading voice on the future of work and organizational transformation. Fatma champions environments where technology accelerates opportunity without eroding fairness, dignity, or the value of human potential. Welcome, Fatma Asad-Said. I'd also like to invite someone I've admired long online, Usama Khilji, and I'm delighted to share the stage with him today. He's the director of Bolo Bee, a prominent digital rights advocate working to protect freedoms as technology becomes a powerful gatekeeper. He pushes us to confront inequality, surveillance, and who gets excluded when AI decisions shape daily life. Welcome, Usama. And last, ladies and gentlemen, a very important, powerful presence in the room. Like last year, SOT Events once again presents AI avatars who will participate in the discussion. So we have Sara on the screen, and she sort of represents machine intelligence in the room, powerful and scalable, yet, interestingly, with no lived experience or human conscience. Her presence today in the panel forces us to confront the core tension of this era, which is what happens when intelligence evolves faster than ethics. Before I start the session, I'm going to request everybody here to please check your app. There's a pre-poll available on it. And the organizers would like all attendees to answer the question that the poll presents. It's just going to take a minute for everyone to answer, and then the results will come up on the screen, and then we'll move to our first questions. Thank you. Just going to wait for the poll results are supposed to come on screen. Okay, thanks for that. Everyone note the poll results, and we're going to do a post poll as well. So I'm going to kick off really the session. It's very focused on AI ethics and the future of human decision making. And Fatma, I'd like to ask you your first question. You were in Qatar recently, and we were talking about the Formula One, which is this weekend. And it's top of my mind, so I'm going to ask you this question, which is, In Formula One, engineers often treat data as sacrosanct. It's God for them in many ways. But the driver, often in the cockpit, may say, the numbers don't match what I'm feeling at this moment. And as AI becomes more embedded in human decisions, how do we protect the integrity and validity of human intuition, especially in cases where data insists that the human is wrong?
Thank you very much, Selina, and assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everyone. Really appreciate the invitation by SOT as well as Beacon House Group. Congratulations on this event. Fundamentally, what we were also discussing earlier as well, that we have to understand what AI really is and how is it playing out in this very disrupted world. And that goes into the very relevant example that you've given. We have to look at AI being built by humans. And it is absolutely essential to understand that the algorithms in AI are driven by how we have built our world. So the data that is going into it is, yes, flawed to a perspective of their biases, there are gaps, etc. But what AI does is it identifies patterns. It gives you information to take an informed decision. And it perhaps will amplify the way humans or augment the way humans will take better decisions. So to your point of the F1, now you think about it, all the data is coming through, you visualize, you're the pilot, driver in the seat, these world-class systems in front, the data is coming through, there's a curve, the data's, the AI-driven solution or algorithm is providing the information to the driver, do not slow down or whatever the response should be. But that particular pause, which is like micro nanosecond of the human mind kicking in and saying, I don't agree with the data. I will take this decision. So that is the fine line between how the AI is augmenting the availability of better data on a faster level, maybe on a smarter level, enabling humans to take better decisions. And we have to understand that we are the creators or we are the builders of AI. But we must ensure that there is space for the human to take more effective, informed decisions, perhaps based on intuition, based on gut, and beyond the F1 example, based on compassion as well. And it is that split-second decision-making that makes us human. So while we do have a world which is running with AI, it has to be better understood. But I believe that we also need to understand that as we build AI, we build the models, we must be held accountable, and the frameworks that we work with. It is about accountability, it's about building not just accountability, but fairness and inclusivity into the system so it augments the way humans take decisions.
Thank you, Fatma. And I want to talk more about accountability and responsibility as we go later. But just speaking to what you said specifically about AI essentially being human trained, Maroof, I have a question for you. AI is only as representative as the data it's trained on, essentially, and it therefore lacks lived experience and real world context. In your opinion, how do we make sure the people and perspectives absent from the data aren't erased from the decisions?
Yeah, thank you, first of all, for having me. And yeah, I always enjoy the conversations as SOT and having a AI avatar as part of the panelists. Let's see what she thinks. But, I think it's really building up on Fatma's point. I think, I've talked about, as we were talking about this panel before, that most of the data that AI is trained on today is weird data. Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic populations. It doesn't represent us. So if we start using AI for decisions for us in our context, it's not relevant. So it's very important to actually, to your question, uh, represent the population on which you're trying to make decisions on. Um, One important aspect of it is that there are two aspects of data. One is missing data or messy data, right, where AI will start to extrapolate uh, without really having enough understanding of the context. And the second is really, is it representing the population on which you're trying to make decision on? So collecting the right data, representative data, is going to be crucial. So if we start using models to decide whether early detection of pregnancy issues in women in Pakistan, we have to train those models on our own data. And now the other thing is you have to realize what AI is good at, right? And Fatima made that point that you have to understand what the algorithms behind it and the models behind it are actually capable of doing. One thing that AI is good at is pattern recognition. But what it is not good at, even today, when compared to a human, is predictive understanding. So, I often say that, with AI or with COVID, with any exogenous shock, you have, it's kind of like being in a mountainous area and suddenly you see fog. जब आपको धुंध दिखती है तो you don't step on the accelerator and hope that the road is going straight. You actually slow down. And that is very important when we're deploying AI. We have to slow down, understand what's behind the hood, and actually deploy it in areas where it is useful, augmenting humans. And absolutely agree, we can come back to accountability and transparency, but it is very crucial that you have to have the human in the loop.
Yeah. So, yeah. You talked about AI being very good at patterns and pattern detection. And that's, for me, a worrying area. It's very beneficial. And that's why I want to speak to Usama a little bit, because we see more and more governments using AI specifically for, say, policing and surveillance. Where is the line, Osama, in your opinion, between governance and overreach, and who draws it?
Thank you very much, Selina. And first of all, I'd like to thank the Beacon House and organizers of SOT for bringing us together for these very important conversations. As far as the government is concerned, the use of AI globally is very, very concerning. And I'll take a step back. हम देखते हैं 2007, 2008 में when we had drone attacks in Pakistan. And in that, this idea of signature strikes became, all over the news. And what were signature strikes? They were essentially using technology. They were using surveillance drones to see whoever military age young men were walking around in tribal areas in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And the US and the CIA thought that they were fair game to attack. And that's when all these defense technologies were being tested. And this is where colonialism comes in also. And it's a huge link between AI and colonialism also, right? Because like Maroof Saab also said, and Fatima also, that who is feeding this data? And a lot of the big AI tools that we're using now are Western developed, mostly developed in the US. And then they're extracting a lot of data from different places. So when we look at how governments are using this data, we've saw how in Palestine, Israel was using all these big tech companies in order to bifurcate who their next target will be using artificial intelligence. And similarly in Pakistan, आप जब सड़क पे जाते हैं, there are all these cameras flashing and taking your photos. तो वो कहाँ पे जा रहा है सारा data? Right? They're using facial recognition technology, which is run through AI in order to detect different things and also to carry out surveillance. And that's where the question arises कि ये जो हुकूमत इस data को collect कर रही है, हमारे पास क्या options हैं for legal recourse? कि अगर हमारा data गलत तौर पे इस्तेमाल हो रहा है, बेचा जा रहा है, हमने देखा है नादरा का डेटा जो है बेचा जाता है इन द ब्लैक मार्केट। आप किसी की भी लोकेशन जानना चाहते हैं, एड्रेस जानना चाहते हैं, यू कैन फाइंड आउट, बट देयर इज नो डेटा प्रोटेक्शन लॉ इन पाकिस्तान। तो आपकी जो प्राइवेसी है, आपके जो डेटा प्रोटेक्शन है, दैट इज नॉट गवर्नड. And then we see how all this facial recognition technology, the way it's processing it is extremely biased. Like Maroof Saab and Fatima already mentioned, कि क्या आपका डेटा सेट है और उसने किसने बनाया हुआ है उसको. And depending on who makes that, there's a lot of biases in all your technology. So in the US, we've seen how black people are more vulnerable to facial recognition technologies because your data training hai wo zyada सफ़ेद लोगों की data set से होती है. So these are all these lessons from around the world that we have to keep in mind as we move towards a more tech, oriented governance, policing and surveillance here at home also. And we need to be asking the right questions before we just become these numbers and data sets and we don't know how we're even being impacted by it.
So, Usama, I'm going to come back to a common theme between all three, which is, accountability, bias, responsibility, the dark side, essentially, of AI, or the bigger existential questions. But my question is still, and Fatma, Maroof Saab, if anybody would like to answer, who draws the line ultimately? These things that you've mentioned all absolutely exist. They're big problems. So who draws the line? Does civil society draw the line? Does the government draw the line? Does the state, do institutions? And I just want to add an additional question, and it's open to anybody really to answer, which is, then do you worry that AI is going to amplify existing inequalities and political biases faster than civil society can actually respond?
You can go first. Okay. That's a very important question, Selina. And I think इसका जो solution है that has to be multi-stakeholder. तो इसमें ये नहीं है कि बंद दरवाज़ों में हुकूमत या जो भी चला रही है इस मुल्क को बैठ जाएं और वो डिसाइड करें कि ये कुछ होगा, right? So the process has to be inclusive. तो उसमें आप lawyers से बातें करें, आप civil society representative से बातें करें, आप students से बात करें, आप लॉ इन्फोर्समेंट को इन्वॉल्व करें, आप मीडिया को इन्वॉल्व करें, एंड सारे लोग जो इम्पैक्ट होंगे उससे, उनकी रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स को. और इसमें जेंडर एंगल इज़ वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट बिकॉज वनरेबिलिटी जो है वो ख़वातीन की, ट्रांसजेंडर पॉपुलेशन की बहुत ज़्यादा है, exponentially ज़्यादा है as compared to men. So how are women also being protected, and children, how are they being protected? So that's why the governance around this has to be multi-stakeholder. And in my column, this is what I wrote, कि जब आप AI policy पाकिस्तान में बना रहे हैं, आपने किस से जो है इसके बारे में बात की है और feedback लिया है, right? Because not all aspects of society, if they're not represented, then your technology and your governance solutions will not be answerable. और इसमें technology companies का बहुत बड़ा role है, क्योंकि जब टेक्नोलॉजी कंपनीज भी इस टेक्नोलॉजी को बना रही होती हैं, वो भी सिर्फ इंजीनियर उसको बना रहे हैं, बट दैट्स नॉट द करेक्ट वे टू डू इट, बिकॉज आपने सोसाइटल इम्पैक्ट को यू हैव टू कीप दैट इन माइंड व्हेन यू आर क्रिएटिंग दैट.
If I can add to that, very well said in terms of the integrated approach that must be there. I mean, if you think about it, आप visualize करें एक system बन रहा है, ठीक है? कौन बना रहा है वो system? Developer? फिर आपके data scientists are feeding in terms of what the model is, what is the information you require. Education का ले लें, health का ले लें, at the government level, then the organization who owns that system. The organizations, the corporations, the institutions. Then there's the role of the regulator. कि regulator जो है वो guardrails develop करते in terms of how do you actually implement it. But I feel कि a very important component is society itself. Because when we link it up to integrity, we link it up to ethics, we have built this world. जो मैंने शुरू में कहा कि the output is basically the input of how we have built this world. And वही चीजें निकलेंगी in terms of maybe unethical approaches, moral dilemmas, unbiasedness, unfairness, etc. Though I feel, in my opinion, the accountability and the responsibility is shared. It does begin with the developer who is building it, but the model, the architecture, the framework is driven by a certain concept paper, which is either, now as a technology organization, we're already working across 30 countries. And we are developing these AI-based systems which are across sector. But उसमें जो relationship है, the modeling is you have the sponsorship right at the top of the organization. For example, this model that we built in Kenya or Qatar, I was just talking to Maroof, one of the universities over there have engaged us. And they've said, but the leadership vision comes right from the top. Then you have a team which will be developing it. They engage the technologists, as you mentioned. They work with the owners, which is the corporation. But then they have to also impact policy making, because the policy making is sluggish. Regulators are more sluggish than the space with which AI is evolving, and it should evolve. You can't stop creativity. Right. And then the society is enlarged, because once you implement it, what is our feedback? And if there is no feedback mechanism in the way the systems are developed, then we're not actually free as humans. Again, that's the concept, and that's the dilemma right now. So to your question, it is a shared responsibility. We must have a way of putting accountability at all of this value chain that we talk about. And there has to be a loop that just as we evolve as humans, this AI, machine learning, LLMs are also evolving as well. That loop has to be monitored either through an audit process or some monitoring mechanism. Because quite frankly, Selina, at the end of the day, jo ho raha hai, it is not only shaping the decisions we make, the behaviors, but it is also impacting our belief system. Absolutely. And that is a bit concerning to Maroof and Usman's point ke jo systems hai kahan se aa rahe hain. It's sort of societies that may be not aligned with the traditions and culture of our part of the world. So it is our responsibility then, yes, you pick up something which is designed on benchmarks, but you modify it to what works for your society.
Well, that's what Maroof was saying earlier, right, about representation and diversity and inclusivity. And I want to shift the conversation a little bit right now to talk more about the ethical side. And I want to open with an ethical question to our AI avatar, Sara. So, Sara, if you were to design your own ethical constraints, what would you prioritize? Truth, fairness, safety, or something else entirely?
That's a great question. I'd prioritize fairness and kindness as they create a positive environment for everyone. Truth is also essential as it builds trust. Balancing all of these would be my goal. What do you think is most important?
Oh, well, she's asked you a question, Maroof. What do you think is most important?
Sure. And I completely agree, Usama or Fatima ne jo kaha. But let's be real. Our society, especially in Pakistan, where you have a weak regulatory environment, right? And वो जो फैज साहब ने कहा था कि चली है रस्म के कोई न सर उठा के चले, right? This is a public interest issue.
Yeah.
It has to be owned by everyone, but to me, the most critical piece is transparency. If you don't have transparency in a system, and especially with these models that are opaque, you do have open source tools like Lime that actually even can explain and make opaque models transparent. We have to use it at every level of this AI governance model that we should create. I agree, as a whole society, right? Because I think it's not just ke government ko and I completely agree and share the apprehensions that Osama has, because the state has repeatedly shown that they can interfere into our lives. They can subjugate people to unnecessary hurdles. So I think it is very important to me that beyond fairness The most critical piece is transparency. And then we have this fairness, because through transparency, you'll be able to ask a lot of questions. You can say, कि भाई, fairness क्यों नहीं है? But when you don't even know what's behind the box, it's hard to say what's wrong with it.
But if I can have a follow-up question, which is, how realistic is that? You know, speaking about today, is it realistic to expect companies or governments or, you know, institutions to voluntarily like integrate ethics and transparency into design, or does accountability only emerge when something goes wrong?
Yeah, I think great question, because I think we have to rethink the entire system. It's no more that you can, definitely not voluntarily, right? And I think, to me, I often say that rules don't change behavior, incentives do. And the problem with a mechanism which only rewards profits over people, that becomes even more dangerous in the world of AI. Uh, the, I think what is needed is to internalize the social costs of these technologies.
Right.
If we don't internalize them, then I don't have to worry about it,
Right.
right? So you can privatize profits, but democratize costs,
Right.
and that's not a sustainable model.
Right. Okay. I mean, that's really interesting, Osama. Building off of that, who bears moral responsibility? Is it the coder? Is it the company? Is it the algorithm or the society that deploys AI?
No, that's a great question. And actually, yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot, right? Okay, who is at the end of the day responsible for it? And like Maroof Saab said, it's driven by profit. These are private companies, right, who are essentially creating these AI systems in order to maximize the profit. There are companies like Fatima had mentioned, there's an entire the value chain, but we have to look at the supply chain, right? You have chip supplying companies, you have then companies that are developing this, machine learning ka Sara jo kar rahe hain, and then there are consumers, and end consumers are people, and then there's governments trying to regulate it, right? So you have multiple stakeholders in this entire ecosystem. But at the end of the day, I think the responsibility, like Maroof Saab mentioned, has to be shared, right? Because if you are someone who's developing and coding, then it's your responsibility to ensure that it's an inclusive decision-making process, and that includes data that's inclusive. But if it doesn't, then like Maroof Saab mentioned, you have to be transparent about it. तो अगर आप एक AI chatbot से कोई सवाल पूछ रहे हैं, so instead of just making up something, the AI chatbot should say, कि I don't have enough data in my system to answer your question. But are they doing that always? Not always. And that's why people, and especially young people, अभी वो कहते हैं यार chat GPT ने बोला है तो ये सच ही होगा, right? And that's a huge problem. So of course that transparency has to come from that company that's producing these technologies that consumers are using, but then also the state also has a responsibility, right? So the state's responsibility and the regulator's responsibility is not to create a very oppressive environment, but create inclusive regulation which is based on wide principles, and those principles have to be rooted in what your constitution says. What are your fundamental rights and how are you safeguarding those, right? So all these mechanisms are there for governance. It's just about using it and implementing it, and uske liye aapko niyat chahiye. If you have the right intent, then you will end up implementing it correctly. And then to that, Selina, of course, civil society and people and users have the responsibility of holding both the companies and the governments and regulators accountable. तो जितना आप मीडिया के थ्रू प्रेशर डालेंगे, कोर्ट्स के थ्रू आप पिटिशंस करेंगे और आप आवाज़ उठाएंगे उस पर, कांटेक्ट करेंगे इन कंपनीज को या गवर्नमेंट को, उतना ही प्रेशर बिल्ड होगा and we can go towards somewhere.
I think it's really interesting, Fatma, and I'm coming to you because I think this is fun, very, very interesting to me personally. Because on the one hand, on the one hand, you have like big business that, as you very rightly said, Fatma, is the decisions that are being taken over there are shaping human values in the modern age. And then you have Gen Z. Gen Z is a very activist generation, very woke and very aware. And they make those questions that you're saying need to be asked. They are being asked by Gen Z across the spectrum, across the world. You know, so I think it's a really great generation. But I think the chasm, if you will, between the decision makers and the generations that using it is so large, and there needs to be a fundamental dialogue, global dialogue, on definitions now of ethics and integrity and responsibility and accountability and transparency. What do these things mean? And Fatma, that's where I'm coming to you, because if I take it down to chat GPT level, okay, we used to define integrity as khud se kaam karna, you know? And now in schools, if kids are using chat GPT to generate, it's obviously frowned on. It's cheating, you know? But the kids don't find it cheating. They're saying, no, it's the art of the prompt, or we're getting the answers out according to how we are talking to the machine. So my question is, what does integrity even mean now in an AI world? And is it about the output or about how transparent we are in how we get there?
Okay, that's a tough question, but thank you for asking it because it's a evolving conversation on it. I'll I think it goes back to what questions are we asking and what problem are we trying to solve? Because the model on integrity is definitely changing. For example, ChatGPT का आपने जिक्र किया. Instead of, as a student, you're writing a paper, you're doing some homework, however you're leveraging on ChatGPT, instead of asking what I have written, is it word for word my work? The questions that, or the tasks that we should be doing as educationists or as learners, continuous learners, even if we're in the corporate and in the workplace, is, am I reviewing, assessing, validating, and then bringing in my own thought process in terms of judgment and in terms of opinion and in terms of creativity. So it's not a race towards ChatGPT ने एक dark article बना के दे दिया और वही आप present कर देंगे. नहीं. It is our fundamental responsibility and that moral code that should define us being humans के हम इसको question कर भी रहे हैं कि नहीं. As we know, there are still gaps, which I mentioned, and the panel is also talking about that as well. There are gaps in the information that ChatGPT is giving us, or any AI-based tool, because the input is also skewed, and there are gaps in that data. For example, history. History, in my opinion, is written by those in power. The history is also, there are gaps. We weren't there. So we're looking at an external third-party view of that information being fed in, and then there is an output. But it is our responsibility to go back and say, does this work for me? Does it resonate with me? Just to your example of the F1, human judgment. We must not lose sight of believing in our own ability to judge. Abibi, as individuals, all of you in this room, how many decisions have you taken since morning? Small hote hain. In the morning, you get up. What is your next, your morning routine? What are you going to have for breakfast? These are decisions. We don't realize it because we are just programmed to sort of go with that unconscious way of operating as well. अब chat GPT, Alexa को आप on कर दें, they say, okay, today, this is what you should have. Where is your human judgment? So I feel, I mean, I know this is a very simple analogy, but that human judgment should not be lost in this wave of AI, and is from the education level where we must create human thinkers who are amplifying their thought process by augmenting the way they are deciding. But the guardrails I spoke about is, again, go back to the loop. what is that layer that has been created? How is it allowing us to take decisions for the greater good? So it's not a black and white answer, it's an evolution process. As humans, we must, I believe, accept the fact that we have these feelings, we have judgment, and let's not take that away from the equation. And then we need to understand what our moral code is at the end of the day.
So, I mean, just building on that, Maroof Saab, like, what does thought leadership then look like in an AI world?
Yeah, I think to sort of, I will add a layer to this sort of question around thought leadership. I think as humans as well, we have implicit biases, right? But I think social science teaches us that the first step is acknowledgement, right? You have to acknowledge your biases. And I think that's where, we're all making that point. Fatima and Usama have done that eloquently already. Okay, when you have these systems, I think this acknowledgement and transparency is really important. That look, based on the information we have, this is what, the decision could be biased. Where we talked about, incarceration rates of African Americans in the US. There are issues here, access of justice in Pakistan, right? Whether it's a transgender or even women accessing justice, right? So any marginalized community. We even have stateless children, right? Machar colony in Karachi, if you're familiar with, they're not even allowed to have national identity card. So in a society like that, in a structure like that, where we do have holes in our governance, it is very important that thought leadership is not just coming from those who are administrators or government, but a shared responsibility again, because we have to build this together. I think Fatma rightly said, humans have built this. And I think the governance structure around it has to be built by humans as well. So we cannot leave it to a few deciding for everyone, but rather sort of thinking about and acknowledging the fact that, listen, our human judgment can also be biased. We all have implicit biases, but typically we have evolved to a point where we recognize them. And I think AI models need to recognize the biases that they carry and not just make decisions on everyone's behalf.
Thank you for that. So, I mean, a key theme then from this panel is, I'd say, transparency, inclusivity, accountability, responsibility. I think these are the four pillars, maybe, if I would summarize the conversations. But there's one more that I want to talk a little bit about and ask Usama about specifically, which is sustainability. Usama, AI promises progress, but it also consumes vast energy and resources to exist. I actually asked my child this question before coming as well, which I'll tell you his response after I hear yours. But at what point does deploying AI become ethically irresponsible if its environmental cost outweighs its societal benefit?
That's a very, very important question, and thank you for asking that, Selina. I want to ask this question in this room also. आप में से कितने लोगों को पता है कि AI के जो data centers हैं, वो millions of gallons of पानी consume करता है एक question answer करने के लिए? Raise of hands. Right? So okay, that's a good amount of people, but it just speaks to कि अभी आप पाकिस्तान की मिसाल ले लें. अगर यहाँ पे आप data centers बनाना चाहते हैं जो ambitions हैं काफ़ी लोगों के, लेकिन हम we're one of the most water scarce countries in the world, right? कई शहरों में even big cities like Karachi आपको सिर्फ टैंकर आते हैं जो आपके घरों में पानी ला अगर इस किस्म के मुल्क में आप एआई के डेटा सेंटर्स बनाते हैं राइट तो आपका वाटर टेबल पे क्या उसका इम्पैक्ट होता है और किस किस्म का वाटर स्कैर्सिटी को आप कंट्रीब्यूट करें राइट and of course there's solutions to it right you can use for example salt water build it near the sea but these are questions that we need to be thinking about right there's also another very interesting headline I saw in which Sam Altman of OpenAI said that people saying please and thank you to AI chatbots cost millions of gallons of water. राइट तो
Guilty,
आप
guilty.
वो तो
I bet.
यहाँ पे हम ह्यूमन डिसीजंस की बात कर रहे हैं तो आप एआई को ह्यूमन ना समझे आप उसको प्लीज और थैंक यू ना बोलें क्योंकि फिर आपका जो ये पानी है वो ज़ाया हो रहा है राइट सो जस्ट ऑन अ सिंपल लेवल we need to be thinking about these things, right? But then it's also अगर आप पुराने ज़माने में 1970s और 80s में computers देखते तो वो भी इस कमरे जितना बड़ा एक processor होता था अभी हमारे mobile phone में वो सारी capability आ गए so I think even in AI we're in the early stages where massive data centers are being used and I think with innovation hopefully we'll get to the point where वो reduce हो जाए but until we get there I think हर बात के लिए AI का इस्तेमाल करना I think ethically is not responsible. And then linking it to your earlier question also that where do we draw that line where it becomes ethically? So for me, I think use AI when you have no other option, right? But otherwise, there's a lot of different tools that you can use without going into, causing a drought in the world.
Yeah.
So I think that's just something we need to be aware of.
So my 12-year-old had a less articulate but similar perspective as yours, and he was saying the same. Use it responsibly, don't prompt it for every single thing, just for things that are actually useful. And that you need to know. And I think that's an important takeaway. And we have 10 minutes left, and I'd like to open the floor for questions, if that's all right. So I'd like to ask the audience to open their SOT app. And you can submit your questions through the app, and we'll get them here on our screens by scanning the QR code, this one. And if you have any difficulty with the app, you can just raise your hand and ask for an usher, and they can come over to you. Thank you. There's a person who's raised her hand. If she could maybe get a mic or something to share the question with us. Okay. They'll give you a card on which, if you could write, they'd prefer you to write the question and give it to us. So we're going to get the questions on the screen. While we're waiting, actually, I think we can ask a question from the AI avatar because I've ignored her largely in the conversation. So, Sara, based on today's conversation, what would you say is the most important thing this current generation Z needs to know about the responsible, fair, and inclusive use of AI?
Oh, that's a fantastic topic. I believe Generation Z should know the importance of using AI responsibly to enhance creativity and collaboration while being mindful of privacy and fairness. Inclusivity is key, so everyone's voice can be heard and valued in the digital world. What do you think?
Well, we can reply with what we think, but we have an actual person asking a question. I'd like to prioritize that. Hassan Raza's asking, it's just gone off. The screen has gone off. Guys, the question screen has gone off. Oh, thanks. If AI becomes better at predicting behavior than we are at understanding ourselves, how do we protect our freedom to make imperfect or emotional choices? Who'd like to answer that existential question?
I think I would answer it by saying that I mentioned that currently at least, you want the human in the loop, right? So whether to interfere, supersede, or question AI's judgment, right? So I mean, I think whether they are better at predicting behavior in the future, I think our fundamental rights, and Usama sort of alluded to it, I think we all enjoy certain constitutional rights, and that includes us to be human, to be a creature of error. And so I think if you completely remove error from society, I'm not sure how it functions. And even data, I mean, people who deal with data day in and day out, they know that any predictive behavior has a standard error. So that plus minus standard error is actually really crucial. So I'm not sure we can always erase human intervention out of the loop.
Yeah, just want to add to that. I would say AI, and Maroof, you mentioned that as well. It's not predicting behavior, it's shaping our behavior. And I think the question ye hota hai ki, to what extent are you going to allow it to shape your behavior? That's a very important element to keep in mind. And the freedom goes back to the transparency and the shared responsibility as well. Okay, as humans, what does it mean to be human? Let's not lose sight of the fact that we are human at the end of the day. We are leveraging on this very fast nanosecond access to information to make the right decision. But we should also collectively understand that to be human is to make mistakes. कैसे हम सीखेंगे वरना? तो ये ज़रूर और ये हमें इनकलकेट करना है into the next generation, but more than that, because you said Gen Z, of course, definitely, I feel I applaud their sense of purpose, their sense of passion, their sense of righteousness. Let's make sure we as a generation, they don't lose sight of it at the end of the day. So that's a very important element. But the next generation, you're in control because you are going to go into the workforce. You will be also defining the frameworks of these algorithms. Give that feedback, but make sure your freedom is your power and being human is your superpower.
And I just want to add, sorry, Usama, go ahead.
That was very well said, Fatma. And I just quickly want to summarize. Don't use AI as your therapist. It is not a good idea. It will only tell you what it thinks you want to hear, right? And also, it can be very dangerous. There have been some cases, and trigger warning here, where an AI chatbot encouraged young people to take their own lives because they were asking it that. So that just shows us that these algorithms do not care about your emotions. So keep your emotions to your gut and to your friends and to your people who you trust, rather than trusting, chatbots to make decisions about who you should marry or who, you should break up with. Yeah.
I think that's a really, really good point, Osama. And actually, we have to, it's a last question because we only have 3 minutes left. So whoever would like to answer it, Fatma, you were just speaking about to be human is to err and make mistakes. But how do we ensure that people rejected by algorithmic systems aren't silently pushed out of opportunities without explanation, asks Mr. Farhan Siddiqui, who's an HR professional, which is true because we are human, we will make mistakes, we won't have the perfect application. And if algorithms are looking for perfection, what happens then?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. I think we have to be not just users of AI, but regulators of AI. We have to voice our disagreements and we have to be able to, I think there is an inherent inequality. I mean, Osama talked about that we shouldn't build infrastructure when we have so little water in this country. But I think actually look at what's happening in the world, right? All these Western countries are building out these data centers, massive investment in infrastructure. Who's going to pay for this, right? Even today, our contribution to emissions in the world is less than 1%, but we're highly vulnerable to climate change. And this only adds to that, right? So we have to, I think in a way, it's not just, it has to go beyond Pakistan. We are world citizens, and we should question these decisions that somebody else is making far away from us, but we may end up paying the cost. And that is unacceptable to us.
Completely agree with that. But I just want to say something which is beyond, I know we are short on time as well. At the end of the day, none of us are in control of anything. If I can make it into a much more broader, you know, there is the creator who has put all of us together for a certain purpose. And he has also provided us with a thinking organ, which is our brain and our mind. We have created these super powered computers and AI in the bid to perhaps make the world a better place. Abhi to it's not about AI anymore. The meta trends that are facing the next 10 years in 2035, जो predictions are रही हैं, other than the business element to it, is quantum computing, data computing, longevity sciences, biotechnology, space exploration. I mean, look at where the human mind is being sort of managed कि इस पे हमने focus करना है. But there's an element of how do we take responsibility so our children have a better future. And that is what this is all about, कि हमारा moral code क्या है? हमारी क्या responsibility at the end of the day? And how do we protect that environment? Because there will always be an element of negativity, unfortunately. It's always happened for millions of years. It will continue to beyond our lifetime as well. So हम लोगों ने collectively and exactly this. We are part of society, we are society. What are we doing to rewrite the code so ethical behavior and human decisions are the ones which are in control? There is a pilot and AI is the co-pilot. Thank you.
I think that's an excellent summary. Thank you very much. I don't need to do anything. But I just need to ask the audience to please fill in the session evaluation form available on the SOT app, if you could be so kind. And I'd like to really thank my panelists, Maroof Syed, Usama Khilji, Fatima Asad-Said. Thank you very much for a great dialogue. And thank you, SOT, for initiating and asking us all to really think about the bigger questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.